Merhaba. Bu sesli kitap okuma işini hobi olarak yapıyorum. Kendime bir meydan okuma olarak yapıyorum. Şamanizmin biraz içindeyim 2013'ten beri. Türkiye'ye gelen şu anda 86 yaşında olan Leo Rutherford diye bir şamanik uygulayıcıyla çalışıyorum. Onun çevirmeniyim. 2013'te tanıştık. 5 günlük bir inziva kampı yaptık Fethiye'de. Yatılı. Çok güzeldi. Pandemide de Zoom'dan devam ettik. 2 yıl boyunca hala devam ediyoruz çalışmaya. Bugün mesela 2 saatlik bir çalışma yaptık. Kitapları var. 2 tane Türkçe'ye çevrilmiş Leo Rutherford'un. 1987'de İngiltere'de ki ilk çağdaş şamanizm kolejini kurdu. Çağdaş şamanizm diyor çünkü ritüelden ve etnik gelenekten tamamen ayrışmış. Sadece psikolojik öğretiler üstüne. Bu öğretiler de farkındalık için günlük yaşamda veya yaşamın genelinde hani felsefi bakış açısında yardımcı olan pusulalar, haritalar konusunda çalışıyoruz. Mesela bugünkü çalışmamız şöyleydi. Swift Deer diye bir hocasının şeması bu. Şunlar 4 ana yön ve 8 ara yön. Bu da şema. İşte hayatın günlük konuları ile ilgili. Hani nerelere bakmalıyız o sorun için mesela. Hangi alanlara bakmalıyız? Zihin, beden, ruh, duygular, geçmiş falan o tip şeyler. Yani şamanizmi çok seviyorum. Bana çok doğru geliyor. Dogmatik öğretileri, çok geleneksel öğretileri sevmiyorum. Hiç öyle yetişmedim çünkü. İşte böyle devam edelim. Burası da atölyem. Bakalım nerede kalmışız. Bir önceki paragraftan başlayayım. As the woman disappeared, I began to run after her. In minutes, I reached the top of the hill where I had last seen her. Eagerly, I looked down to the other side. For a moment, I saw only lush, verdant pasture and fog rolling in from the west. Then a movement and a splash of red caught the corner of my eye. The woman, falcon still perched on her arm, was walking around a low, cobbled wall toward a small stone cottage at the end of the path. High flowers surrounded her, and finally several elms and alders obscured her from view. I started running down the hill. As I reached the path she had been on, I saw her enter the cottage and close the sky blue door behind her. I ran up the path through a garden to the cottage. The hedges and surrounds were of roses and holly. I knocked at the door. It opened, and an old woman stood at the threshold. She wore her grey hair pulled back off her face, which was wrinkled but oblong and fair. She looked like someone's grandmother. Her eyes twinkled blue from underneath heavy lids. Grandmother, there is the wondrous woman that I followed here. Where is the wondrous woman that I followed here? I asked, suddenly realizing how rude I was being. She smiled at me and said, amiably composed, my child, I have just made honey cakes. Will you come in and have one? I looked through the door, past the old woman standing in her long dark blue dress and white lace apron, at the pleasant room, expecting to see a falcon on its perch. But there was no falcon. A last ray of sunlight flowed in through the leaded windows. There was the smell of warm cakes in the air. My stomach moved, and I immediately became hungry. But I was mystified and a little frightened. I had seen the woman with the falcon pass through this door moments before. It was very strange, and despite my fear, I was enthralled by the mystery of it all. As I looked at the old woman standing there, smiling at me, my wide eyes betrayed my concern. "Come, child, you seem afraid. Perhaps I can serve you in your trouble," she said. Tentatively, I walked into the cottage. She took my cloak and hung it on a peg on the back of the door. I went over to a very simple wooden table. There were cakes in a basket and honey, and a pool of sunlight reflected from a silver knife. I sat down in an old wooden chair and unreasonably wanted to cry. I could not understand why I was so upset. The old woman sat down across the table from me, and we ate honey cakes in a companionable silence. After a time, as if reading my thoughts, she said, "My child, you are troubled. There is no need. You are a very special, beautiful young girl. The world can be any way you want it to be." I looked at her in wonder. She seemed wise and strong, but there was something else unexplainable, a kind of light around her body. Maybe it was just the effect of the late sun flooding in through the windows behind her. "May I ask your name?" "My name is Catherine," I said. "You may call me grandmother." "It is a pleasure to meet you, Catherine," the old woman said, a smile wrinkling her cheeks. "Grandmother, is the mysterious woman with the falcon your daughter?" I asked, watching her face. "As you can most plainly see, there is no woman or falcon in my tiny cottage. She must have gone into the forest," the old woman said. She handed me a honey cake, which I took happily. "What brings pleasure to your life out here so far from anyone?" I asked. "I grow flowers, and I guess you could call me a teacher." "What do you teach about?" The old woman smiled and looked away. Her eyes caught the rosy glow of the failing sun, and for a moment she looked years younger. There was an irresistible kindliness in her expression. I knew that I had at long last found a friend. "Not to presume what is clearly before your eyes, but I teach about life and truth," she finally said, looking directly into my eyes. "Will you teach me?" I asked eagerly. "Are you sure that truth is something you want to know about?" "Yes, if it would make me grow up to be like you." The old woman laughed as she glanced out the window at the sunset. After a long pause, she spoke to me seriously. "Remember this, my child. Yes, I will teach you, but you must never tell anyone about our work together, for it is a sacred secret. For reasons yet unknown to you, I trust you, because I know of your spirit, even though we are strangers. Although you are still a maiden, you have the spirit of a woman, and you are a woman with great heart. I send you home now, my child. It is getting late. I wish you good dreams this night, and when you arrive home, everything will be to your liking. Do not be of fearful mind. Go on with your life as you always have, and when you need to see me, I will be here, always ready to serve you. Bless you, my child," she said, and kissed me on top of my head. I walked out the door, wrapped my cloak about me against the chill, and began to run home along the path. My mind was buzzing with this new encounter, and most of all I was excited because I had a friend. I felt as though my whole life had changed, as if I were suddenly waking up. I had a new reason for living, and although I did not know clearly what that reason was, I knew that this old woman had answers for me, and I had so many questions. Chapter 4: Descending the Dream. A blast of cold air on my face awakened me from my dreaming. I opened my eyes, and Agnes was kneeling beside me. In her hand was her beautiful beaded fan. She was dusting my face with the long feathers. The current of cold air had come from the opening door. Ruby had just entered and was sitting at the other side of me, a quizzical look on her face. "Well," she said. I looked at Ruby and just shook my head. I looked at Agnes and I could not find the words to describe what had happened to me. "Agnes, you are so much like the woman, the grandmother in my dreaming," I said, as I took off the necklace with great care. Agnes chuckled to herself and offered me a piece of jerky. "What woman are you speaking of, little black wolf?" she asked. "I'm sorry, I'm talking about the woman in my dreaming. I feel as if you have been with me, both you and Ruby." "See, there you go running off and not telling us what you are doing," Ruby said in a huff. "Why don't you take us with you? That would certainly be the kind thing to do." "But Ruby, I feel as if you are already with me in my heart when I come back here to this dream lodge. In a sense, it's the same place, although it looks different." "Oh, really?" Ruby said, looking at me as though I had lost my mind. "Well, I guess you can fool some people with that kind of talk, but you certainly can't fool me. Why don't you let me get my feet on the ground and wake up a bit, Ruby, before you get all angry with me?" "Well, how would you feel if you were always left behind?" Ruby said. "I wouldn't feel good about it, Ruby, but you know I'm not leaving you behind. If I could take you with me in my dreams, I would." "Well, you can," Ruby said with a sly look. "But Ruby, I can hardly take myself. How can I take anyone else? I haven't learned how to do that," I said. Agnes clucked her tongue at Ruby and shook her head. "Little Wolf has not learned how to dream with us yet, but she will soon. Perhaps not in this journey, but maybe in the next one." "Well, I sure wish she would learn a bit faster," Ruby said disgustedly. "Come, Lynn, it is time for breakfast. You must be very hungry. Go into the cabin. We will eat. Then perhaps you can tell us of this wonderful dream journey that you have been taking." "You mean I missed dinner?" I asked. "Yes, I'm afraid so," Ruby said. "I even had to do the dishes, and you know what that means." Agnes laughed. "Yes, you missed dinner, but it is time to get up. You have been dreaming long enough. Come." I got up very slowly from the sheepskins and placed the necklace carefully above the altar. I was stiff, and even though I was wrapped in robes, I felt very cold. Agnes and Ruby turned me around to the four directions and smudged me with sweetgrass, sage, and cedar. We all three took offerings to the fire, thanking the Great Spirit and Mother Earth for my journey. We left the dream lodge, closed the flap behind us, and walked up the trail along the creek back into the cabin. There was smoke coming out of the cabin's chimney. I took a deep breath and shook my head to clear it. Part of me was still in that green landscape with the oak trees. For a moment I looked for the lake and my horse. I was disoriented and suddenly very sick to my stomach. I looked up at the sky, dark with heavy rain clouds. I felt a few raindrops on my face, and we began to run toward the cabin. By the time we reached the porch, the rain was coming down in sheets and being blown across our path in a torrent. Inside the cabin it was cozy and dry. We stripped off our parkas and sat down at the table that stood next to the old wood-burning stove. "Did you go back to the Yucatan?" Julie asked as she served us muffins and honey and tea. For a moment I didn't know what she was talking about. Then I realized that she was asking if I had gone down to visit Jaguar Woman. I had once long ago followed the butterfly migration in my dreaming. No, July, this dreaming was not to go down and visit Jaguar Woman, Zoila, and Jose. My dreaming this time is back into a long ago age. I don't really know how long ago it was because I didn't ask anybody what the date was, I said. What do you mean, a long ago age? Julie asked me, surprised. That's why we built the dream lodge, Agnes said. Oh, now I understand, July said. Yes, July, a dream lodge is used for dreaming, Ruby said, smiling at her as she poked July's ribs. I guess that is pretty obvious, July said. I didn't realize that you would use the lodge to dream separately from sleeping. We all started to laugh at July's confusion, and July laughed with us, shaking her head. I must say, July, I am as confused as you are, I said. I don't quite understand what is happening, and I'm hoping that when we have finished breakfast, we can all talk. I need to understand this better. That's what we are all here for, Ruby said. Yes, thank you, Ruby, I said, handing her a muffin and a spoonful of honey. Where is that currant currant jam I like? Ruby asked impatiently. We don't have any more currant jam, Agnes said. I don't know why you would give an old blind lady honey. Don't you see it is getting all over me? My fingers are getting sticky and I don't like it, Ruby said. Ruby was rubbing furiously at her fingers, which she used to catch drips of honey that were dribbling down her chin. She bounced up and down like an impatient little girl. I couldn't help but laugh at her antics. I didn't know whether she was teasing or not. Well, thanks a lot, Lynn. I'm glad I'm an object of fun for you, but I don't enjoy this one bit. If you had any respect for your elders, you would find me some currant jam. But you heard Agnes, we are out of currant jam, and actually it's not jam anyway, it's jelly. Whatever it is, it's better than this stuff. I don't think it's very nice of you, Lynn. Every time you come here, we are always having trouble, Ruby said. Ruby, you're having honey as has nothing to do with me. Oh, yes, it does. Well, how do you figure? Agnes always saves the honey and brings it out when you're here because she knows you like it. Otherwise, we would never have to have any of this nasty, sticky stuff. Agnes got up from the table, picked up the honey, put it away on the shelf, and came back and sat down. Ruby was looking around for something, slapping at the table with the palms of her hands. Ruby, what is it now? Agnes said. Well, I can't eat this muffin without anything on it, Ruby said. But you have a little butter on it, July said. You impertinent young lady, Ruby said to July. I am not going to eat this muffin without anything on it. Now Ruby was sitting in her chair with her shoulders hunched and her chin jutting out like an old crone. Agnes looked at Ruby and said, shaking her head, Ruby, what can we do to make you happier? Just tell us and we will try to do it. Just never mind, Agnes. If I don't matter to you, if you don't care whether I get any currant jam, that's just fine with me. Just neglect me. I don't care. Lynn is the guest of honor. Ruby, you are being quite unfair, I told her. Great. Now you think I'm being unfair. Well, that's the thanks I get for all I've done for you. You can just forget the whole thing. I don't even care where you have been on your journey. I really don't care. In fact, I'm going to leave right now. Ruby stood up angrily from the table. She walked quickly across the cabin floor and opened the door. A blast of cold air and rain drenched her before she could slam the door. She turned around and said, I see. You want to send me out there so I can drown. Thank you very much. Here, Ruby, I have the perfect answer. There is a little bit of raspberry jam left. Would that make you happy? July asked after rummaging through the cupboard. Well, that certainly is better than honey, Yes, that would be fine, thank you. And no thanks to you, Lynn. Ruby sat back down, soaking wet, and took a big bite from the muffin. A smile was restored to her face. Ruby happy again, we discussed my physical reactions on coming out of the dream time, my coldness, and how that was a natural reaction for the body being separated from its spirit and astral energy or heat. But mostly we discussed how I, as Catherine, could understand words in an early form of English that I had never heard. It constantly amazed me how I could understand events and things on a visceral level. Agnes explained that one's spirit shield is imprinted with information that relates to personal patterns of growth and spirit evolvement. This imprinting is recorded on the spirit shield and remembered from one lifetime to another, once you have been initiated. She explained that the actual name Sisterhood of the Shields was chosen because shield, in a metaphorical sense, is another description of spirit that lives on forever. After talking for some time about my dream journey, we went to bed. I slept well that night and woke up early and wrote for several hours in my journal. Agnes and I went to the dream lodge in the early afternoon. We gathered wild blue and yellow flowers in the horse pasture and placed them on the face of the earth, my altar in the lodge, before I put on the necklace and lay down to begin my dream work. I was beginning to see that I would simply enter into my past life at random. I would not re enter exactly where I had left off. Agnes said that there was no explaining this phenomenon. There was not a long time lapse, but always some shift in circumstances. Chapter 5: Fear of the Unknowable. Grandmother and I walked out behind her old stone cottage. We sat on two chairs bleached white with age in a brightly colored flower garden that had obviously been cared for very lovingly for many years. It was early afternoon, and I had come straight to the old woman's house as soon as I could get away. What are you so nervous about, my child? Grandmother asked. Grandmother, there is something about secrets, about not being able to tell anyone about you. You are so important to me, and I want to share our friendship with everyone, I said. The old woman looked at me with a twinkle in her eye. What is your fear, my daughter? I fought for several minutes, trying to figure out a way to describe the feeling of tension I had in my stomach. Well, grandmother, I guess fear is a knot in your stomach. I feel apprehensive, full of anxiety for I don't know what. Are you afraid of something that will happen in the future, Catherine? Yes, I guess you are right. I'm afraid that I am going to get into trouble somehow for learning secret teachings. Look around you. Look at the flowers. See how beautiful they are. Look at the butterflies as they dance from one flower to another. Feel the soft wind on your skin. Feel its warmth. Feel the rays of the sun bathing your body with light. That is all there is, my child. That is the present. Whether you understand that fully now or not, that is really all there is. There is no past and there is no future. There is only this moment that we share together. I looked around at the flowers and felt the balmy air on my skin. I looked up at the sun shining down through the trees, and my body relaxed a little. I looked at grandmother, whose eyes held such kindness. You know, grandmother, it is foolish for me to be full of anxiety because I have never been so happy. Perhaps you are afraid to be happy. It is just that I have been lonely for so long. I never really had anyone to talk to. I guess because I am so happy now, I realize that I have never been happy before. So tell me, Catherine, where do you feel this fear? I feel fear like a sheet of tension down my back and like a fist in my stomach. Can you name that fear? Can you say what fear actually is? Not just what it feels like, but what fear is. I sat for several minutes and realized that I did not have an answer for her. Pardon. Fear is a part of the unknowable, grandmother said, part of the vast experience we cannot name. For much of our experience as human beings is unnameable. We talk around the feelings. We explain where and how we felt the feelings. But the feeling itself is part of the unknowable. It is something we cannot really touch. Close your eyes for a moment and take a deep breath, Catherine. Try to find fear inside you. It will elude you. Close your eyes and let us see if we can find this little rascal that is causing you so much difficulty. I spent a long time in meditation with grandmother. Fear was like a mad dog running around inside me. When I went to search for that fear inside my stomach, it ran up the back of my neck. When I moved my consciousness into the back of my neck, it ran down my back and I could not find it. Finally, when I cornered that mad dog back in my stomach again, I looked hard and could see nothing. At that point, I opened my eyes. I told grandmother what had happened. She smiled. Catherine, the nature of fear is unexplainable because it is not really there. How can that be, grandmother, when I can feel it? No, my daughter, fear is elusive and hides from you, but it is not part of the present. When you say that you are afraid of what will happen to you as a result of knowing me and having this secret friendship, what are you really afraid of? I'm afraid that someone will find out. Who? Grandmother asked. I'm afraid that my parents will find out and I will get into trouble. See, grandmother said, that is part of the future, is it not? Yes, I said. When you think about the past and how much trouble you have been in before, that is something that is not in the present either. So you see, when you make yourself present and you sit with yourself in meditation and go within yourself, fear disappears. It cannot exist under scrutiny at all. Grandmother left her chair and went inside the little stone house and came back with a tray of oat bread for us. She said nothing, but I watched her careful movements. Everything she said, everything she did was done with grace and perfection. I have noticed that when people do something that is a chore, they become very impatient. When grandmother did things, she did them with great care, wasting no movements. Even to watch her do something as simple as serving the bread was satisfying. Grandmother, I love watching you prepare the bread for us. Thank you, Catherine. Why is it that you enjoy this so much? Because your movements are so beautiful, because you are so careful with things, because you do not waste any time. Oh, grandmother, I appreciate you very much. Thank you for being my friend. Grandmother smiled and said nothing. As I watched the sunlight play on her face, I could have sworn that she grew much younger right before my eyes. She looked for a moment like a very young girl. The way she threw her head when a butterfly landed on her hair was not the movement of an old woman, But I said nothing and just watched, enjoying the companionship of my new friend. The rest of the afternoon we said very little. I sat with grandmother in the dirt while she furrowed the ground and planted new seeds for her summer flowers. The current between us was wordless. Every once in a while a butterfly would come down and fly first around her head and then around mine and then fly away. I learned much from watching grandmother. She had a way of using her fingers. Now and again she would hand me a stone and have me hold it first in my left hand, then in my right. Then she would ask me to close my eyes and listen to the stone and see if the stone had anything to tell me. It might say it was male or female. More often than not, the stone would tell me something about my life. One time a brown, jagged stone reminded me exactly of my father and his sharp temper. I would give the stone back to the old woman, and she would place it where she found it. Later that afternoon, just as I was about to leave, grandmother reached into her pocket and took out a clear quartz crystal. It was very small, faceted on one end, and very smooth, as if it had been polished. She handed it to me. I want you to take this home with you and place it under your pillow. I would love to do that, grandmother, but tell me why. I want you to learn to dream, but I dream a good deal already. No, there is dreaming and then there is dreaming. But I don't understand. Place the crystal under your pillow tonight and remember your dream. Perhaps when you awaken in the morning, you will have had a very special experience. I want you to write down enough of it so that you can remember what to tell me when next you see me. The crystal is from Danu, the Divine Mother, the Old One. In this aspect, and she has many, she is benign. You have also experienced her more mysterious side as the lakeside enchantress, the insatiable one. You mean the woman I was intrigued by down by Collingham's Lake? Yes, Catherine, but Danu's crystal will bring you contentment and new learning. What will I do if someone finds the crystal, grandmother? Is it not possible that you could have found the crystal on your own, Catherine? Oh, I imagine so. Well, tell them it was a gift from the earth. That is true. I gave grandmother a big hug and she kissed me on the forehead. I pulled my cape around me because the sun was now covered with clouds and it was much cooler outside. I left the garden of the little stone house and walked quickly down the road toward home. When I arrived home, I went to my bedchamber and placed my crystal under my pillow. That night I fell asleep almost immediately, for I was very tired. I dreamed of the woman I had seen on the jetty. I had not been to the lake for some time now, but I immediately recognized her in my dreams. She was standing in a clearing high on a hill, working with her falcon. I watched from below. She was holding her arm, wrapped with leather, up to the sky. With a shriek, the falcon swooped down and landed on her arm. Then the woman turned in my direction, and lifting the great bird high, she sent him toward me. He circled me several times, flying sunwise. The whole dream did not take very long, but it made a great impression on me because of its stark reality. When I awoke in the morning, I did not need to write it down. I knew I would never forget it.